I used to always go to the meetings, but I couldn't hear very well, so I just watched it at home.
Wait.
Okay. I'm going Tuesday to have a hearing.
Okay.
And this one.
Let me call the meeting to order, please. The first of business is the approval of the October 21 committee minutes.
Move approval. Second.
Is there any comment? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
And item 3 then is the final end of fiscal year report on the audited numbers.
Near final. Minor qualification. Not that will really affect the general fund, though, right?
Sure
Do you guys want to go?
Well, we'll both talk about it. We submitted either at the last meeting or maybe it was the meeting before, a preliminary for the 12 months ending June 30th. And we have not heard back fully from the auditors about any changes. They have indicated to us, with a couple of exceptions that we're going to talk about, that they see no changes to the numbers that we presented. But they always give us the caveat that they may find something in the grants, not in the general fund, but in the CD, the block fund grant, the block grant fund, or possibly another small grant where there's a lot of activity in small amounts. If there are any changes, they will not be meaningful changes to the final audit report. To kind of give you the big picture, the audit report should be ready and finished by the time of your next meeting. We certainly hope to have it ready at that time. We're supposed to get back the numbers from the auditors next week. It then takes us about roughly 2 weeks to write the discussion and analysis that goes in the front of the report that management is required to provide. What we would recommend is that we deliver you that report in the audit report in December. And instead of trying to schedule, it's so hard to schedule the auditors in December. And because I know last year we wanted them to come back after you've had a chance to really look at the audit, that it would be better for us to go ahead and receive the audit in December and then schedule them to come in at the Finance Committee meeting in January so that you can have a chance. So they can make their presentation and you can have a chance over the holidays to look at the report and prepare questions for them. So, Mike, if you want to go through the details.
I sure can. If you look at the highlights, if you'll notice that the deficit looks like it's going to be $2.6 million. We had anticipated $3.1 million, and so it actually came in less than what we were anticipating. And the big thing in the past year was how was local sales tax, and actually it actually finished about 1% less than the actual for the previous year. So those are kind of the two main things that I guess came up from the previous year. Russ alluded to 2 significant changes the auditors had discovered, and if you'll turn to page 3, I'd like to just kind of let you know what those were. And there were 2 significant, but what happened is though they kind of offset each other. Is business taxes now come to us, on page 3, if you actually look at the page numbers.
Oh, I got you.
Is what happened was the state started giving us business taxes. Well, whenever we get taxes from the state, we accrue it. Well, at the same time, what happened is when they were received, they were also recorded as revenue. Just happened to be the largest months of the year. So in essence, $800,000 was in the financials that basically had to be removed. So pretty significant mistake. We wish we would have discovered it. In essence, what happened is the revenue got duplicated. So basically, we just had to remove it.
And there was a crossover this year between local collection of business tax to state collection of business tax. And I think that's essentially what caught us is that transition.
Exactly.
So were we just putting it on books like that? We certainly weren't duplicating
we put
collection.
it on books on an accrual basis, which basically essentially meant we put it when it was earned. Then when it was received on the cash basis, it got hit by the same revenue account a second time. So in essence, it showed twice. So that's how that came up. Now, by the same token, what we also had is, we've had the monies that y'all were aware that we've received from the county for facilities taxes, and that's amounted to $1 million. So we've needed to put that on the books, so in essence, at the same time, the two offset each other and actually came up a little bit to the good. Basically, we need to subtract 800,000, but add $1 million. So that's why, if you look on page 3, you'll actually see that's where we come up with the draw of 2.6 million. So if that actually turns out to be close to where the final numbers are, the ending fund balance in the general fund would be at 26 million. So,
So that 1 million, though, is coming, the facility tax from the county, that was collected from when to when?
Before 2007.
Yeah,
Over about a
2007.
2.5-year period.
So, okay.
And we just didn't, there
We
hadn't
didn't.
been a designation of those funds and how to use those funds, and they were sort of held,
Well, they were essentially held in escrow. One of the reasons that they are showing here is that the auditors are insisting that until we make a designation, that this is general fund money, and we can't go back and change it for the prior year. If you notice on your agenda for next week, we've put something on the work session to have a discussion about whether we can go ahead and target those funds and set the policy that those funds would go into a capital projects fund. At that time, we can go ahead and reverse what's coming in this year so far and any future monies and make sure that they're set aside and not in the general fund. But until we actually make that designation,
Okay.
we're required to show them here.
Were they part of the unreserved fund balance before right now?
They were not.
So were they showing anyway? Did they show them
Yeah, they
anywhere?
were.
No, because
Yeah, we talked about that
they
before.
negated, we showed them as both revenue and deferred revenue. In other words, we had the money, but we hadn't earned it yet. So it
They hadn't
essentially...
earned the $1 million?
That's right.
But it wasn't, I mean,
That was our method of reflecting the fact that it had not been designated yet.
Hadn't been counted in the balance either.
That's right.
I remember we talked about that
And I think-
last meeting or something.
yeah, in my understanding too, there was some uncertainty about whether the city was even going to continue to keep those funds, and there hadn't been policy direction on that specifically or ask of you, just because we weren't sure on how that was going
That's
to break
right.
out.
In the prior 2 years, the auditors, because there had been no designation and there was some question about whether we would return it to the county,
Yeah, because they had asked for it back, didn't they?
that's right. They did not
I remember
require
that.
us to post it this way.
Right. They had,
So this is now the direction the auditors are giving us to go ahead and account for it in the general
yeah,
fund.
they had asked for it back, but they also had asked if we didn't, we would designate it for when the impact for the schools that when,
The county
yeah,
asked that, yes.
exactly. Okay.
and that's what it's turning out to be.
That's
Which was
exactly
a
what
good-
you
which was a
ended up
good thing,
doing,
because
is
we ended up
to tie to
paying it.
a city capital project that is impacted by school development.
Which we now need.
going beyond the general fund, if we turn to page 6, maybe...
Before you step on from that, I just want to, one of the key things in the general fund to just sort of remind everybody of is this is pretty close to right on, if not a little better than what we had budgeted for. Remember, you put $2 million specifically into the pension in this budget, so that was a one-time expenditure of fund balance that you designated to shore up that pension. And just to kind of keep refreshing everybody's memory on that structurally,
Right.
our balance, that wasn't a structurally imbalanced budget, that was a choice you made to shore up the pension, and we can share some other information about where the pension is today versus where it was 2 years ago that I think will validate the wisdom of that decision by the board, so I'll let you go on and go over the
I have
question.
one more thing to say just on the front here. I noticed that it's discusses local sales tax is 1% less than last year. You've already mentioned that. Fuel costs were less. But when it got down to road impact fees, it says those collections are 34% of last year. I think it ought to also say they were however how many percent less, in keeping, I mean, just to be consistent there, because I think on the rest of them, you talk about something less than last year or higher than last year, and on that one, it just says a percent of that.
Very good
But
point.
but as I say, just to be consistent. But now, That's the only,
Yeah. In fact, if we could, actually, I'd like to see if we could look at the road impact fund on
Okay.
page 6,
Yes.
because probably an item of note based
Yes,
on
it
that is that if you look at the ending fund balance, it actually ended in a deficit of a little over $500,000, and it's because, in a lot of cases, because the road impact fees were less than what we had anticipated. So I think that's also why the discussion is occurring right now about the road impact fees, but I guess this fund is in a deficit, and also if you turn to page 7, facilities tax remains in a deficit, and that goes back to, again, its contribution toward the police headquarters construction.
but it is less than it was.
Exactly.
You know,
And that would
for
be
as far as facilities tax. The concern that I had, and I appreciate you bringing up the road impact fee, if you look at how much money came in and then how much we transferred to debt service, the shortfall there, because we are certainly not going to transfer to debt service any less next year than we did this year, and we don't have how much was it, the $1 million beginning fund balance. And so I think that is a great concern and something that we need to look at, because that debt service has to be paid regardless. That's right. You can't cut back on your expenditures there, and so that has implications for the general fund if that debt service needs to come out of it. And so I definitely think we need to keep close tabs on this and see what this is looking like, because we have set the debt service up there to be a fairly substantial amount, which I do not think it would have covered for the last 2 years, really.
The numbers after the general fund that are in this packet are virtually identical, though, to the packet that we handed out last month. And again, it's worth noting those deficits. There's also a deficit in the community block grant fund.
That one,
but
is that one a little
tiny.
different? We'll talk about that when we get to it.
All right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
He's
it
jumping
is.
ahead of you.
Yeah, with the CDBG program, it is, the reason there's a deficit in that is it goes back to grant receipts. And if we don't receive them within 60 days of year end, then we have to put them in deferred revenue instead of recording them as revenue. So essentially, I think they came in shortly after 60 days, but it's one of the things we're stressing with our departments that have grants. Anytime you make an expense, we need to make every effort to try and get those monies in before 60 days. So that's kind of the rule of thumb we're letting our departments know. And it just turned out that for this particular grant, those monies came in after 60 days. So according to the accounting rules, it could not be recorded as revenue, resulting in a deficit fund
What did you
balance.
say, as of 60 days of what?
Within 60 days of the expense.
Of the expense, okay. I didn't hear that, I'm sorry.
But
I was
we
thinking
do-
that was it,
Exactly,
but,
that's
you know,
it.
I just want to clarify that.
We do have the money, though.
We do have the monies, yes, we do.
Okay.
Because we haven't gone beyond the grant money on any time on this, as opposed to some others, like the facilities tax and road impact fees. Where we have gone beyond it. Do you have some other things? I had
I
some.
was going to maybe highlight
Please.
one or two more
Please.
things. On page 13, in the debt service fund, which we had just mentioned, what happens is, for the solid waste, road impact, and hotel motel tax fund, we transfer just enough to pay the debt service. You'll notice there's a surplus. That surplus comes from the property taxes that were designated to come to pay the general funds portion of the debt. So in essence, instead of there being a deficit in this fund, you actually have a surplus. So it's one that, depending on how we do future property tax designations, there is this amount out there that could be used for future general fund debt.
And if I might just add, the reason that there is a surplus there is not because we're terrible at math. It's because interest rates were particularly low. And on the variable rate portion of our debt, we did not have to pay as much as we budgeted. So thus the fact that as the property tax came in pretty much as expected, the interest payments went out a little bit less than expected.
Now, and I didn't look back at these numbers, what was the number of cents allocated last in 2010, and what are the number of cents?
I think it was 11 last year, and
It's
19
this year, yeah.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
That sounds right to me, now that you say it, I just didn't go back to look at it.
You know, we actually ought to put that in the description.
We do.
Oh, that's not a bad idea.
That'd be a great idea.
Not a bad idea.
The last note, maybe if we turn to page 14, on the capital improvement bonds, we actually issued those bonds of $44 million back in December of last year. So that's why you see now a surplus of $12 million. Basically, that, if you think of a bond use summary, in essence, that was the amount that was left unspent at the end of fiscal year 2010.
Yeah, whenever we were talking about the capital improvements, we said something about that, and I know comments were made, and I think I made notes of them, but I sure didn't go back and look at that, about what monies from each of those and what some of them are restricted on what they can be spent for, and that would be good to kind of have that, what out of these, out of the new bonds, and what if they are restricted, and I know the recovery bonds are restricted, but if we could look and see how that's allocated, that would be good.
Well, yeah, that's the story for last year, June 30th, and we kind of have these two items on the agenda, 2 and 3. 2 is looking backwards, and you're going to get the full audit report sometime in the next 30 days or so. And it will have all of these numbers, and it will have a whole lot more that's in there, plus our letter that discusses many of the things we've talked about tonight.
I do have some other things before we go on to the next one, but that's kind of the good news, isn't it? So on page 4, where we're talking about street aid and transportation, I noticed that that had transfer from the general fund, but also they had a fund balance before, going into, I guess, 2010, right? Had a fund balance, and they used that, almost all the fund balance plus the transfer from the general fund. And I do remember there were some special projects there, but it does look like a lot more spent than out of the money available. How about that? Could I say it that way?
But if you notice in the last column, we actually budgeted $2.5 million, and we anticipated making $1 million transfer in order to do a lot of the projects. And because the money was not there, and because our variety of revenues were much softer than we anticipated, sales tax, building permits, all of those other fees, we did do what we could to pull back on those. There was actually $2.5 million contracted during the year, and one of the things we'll see later on the agenda are some budget amendments where additional money was spent, not in time to get it in the year ending June 30th.
I was wondering about that, but I didn't connect the dots.
We had some delay in doing some of those projects. The flood played a role in that.
Yeah.
We had to divert some of our efforts to go more towards that. This is the area, too, when you consider the current budget that we're operating under. We're doing projects resurfacing based only on the local share of the gas tax received. We are not doing an additional supplement from the general fund in that area.
This year, yeah.
We're sort of living with what the targeted revenue for this purpose is. And that's something to look at long-term, because that affects our ability to do the resurfacing and the cycle that we're on. The good thing is that our staff has developed a program that covers all of our streets, but it's all based on how much money we can afford to spend in a given cycle. So that's where that takes us.
Yes, and that probably is, unfortunately, going to need to be the way it is.
Well,
Really.
unless we target other funds and make other choices, that's where we are, and that's one of the tough decisions we had to make in this budget to balance. So.
Okay, and let's see. You hit a lot of the things that I was going to ask about, so I appreciate that. On page 7 on the facilities tax fund, just something that I wanted to know, because I knew we were trying to, how about pay down the amount of deficit there, but it said equipment over $10,000 was $215,000. I mean, I know we talked about that, but it was just kind of surprising.
Is that in the prior year-to-date actual column? In essence, that was last year's expenses.
So it says current year-to-date actual.
215, is that what you're talking about?
I'm sorry, on 7, it's down right before,
Okay.
above total capital. It
Yes,
says
exactly,
215,
yes.
so you're thinking that was contracted the year
Well,
before?
that was last year's expenses. What I was thinking is we may have gone to the quarterly report.
Well, we're still talking about...
Oh, no, I'm still talking about last year's expenses, yes.
I don't remember exactly, but I do know that in July of '09, we had some carryover in solid waste equipment that we had planned to buy that was expansionary. We were adding equipment, and I think we had designated to pay that out of facilities tax. And at that point, I don't think we had quite the deficit that we had. So
Right, yeah.
I think that was a carryover really from fiscal '09, that much like the things we're talking about, the street aid money is going to have to roll over to FY10. I'm sorry, to 11
To 11,
from
right,
10.
10.
I think that was a remnant from the year before.
And you're absolutely right. In fiscal year 2011, there are no expenditures budgeted for facilities tax.
Right, because that was the idea. That was the
There are no
idea.
expenditures budgeted
Be-
for facilities tax in 2011.
Because we need to pay down the deficit there. We need to take a few years to get that deficit out before we spend anything new
back in.
there. Okay, and that, let me see. On the transit fund, obviously we had budgeted, I'm sorry, whoops, I can't read it. Page 11. I just written over it. I apologize. Page 11, our transfer from the general fund was, I guess, twice as much as it was the year before. We had obviously budgeted that, but still, that came as an unpleasant surprise to me.
The year before, we had some grant money that was accrued and not paid, and it reduced what we normally would have had to pay that year before. But we've been right at the $500,000 mark, a little below or a little above, for each of the last 4 or 5 years. So that has been pretty steady. The ending numbers, remember, this is a snapshot on June 30th of where we stood, and at any given point, depending on how quickly we get the expenses sent in for reimbursement and how quickly the reimbursement comes back, that determines if they match up at any given time.
And I noticed that on the transit fares, they were very close to what they were the year before, but not, much less than what we had budgeted there. So, so when we talk about the total revenues, really, that increase in the total revenues was just the amount that the city paid, right?
That's true.
Okay, and we talked about a couple of the other things here. Oh, on page 15, on water and sewer. In the middle of the page where it talks about capital contributions here. And then down there it says system development fee and access fee. Now those are the things we've been talking about recently, but I was astonished. $3.8 million What was that? That had to be something big.
It was a construction project. That may have been the condos and the office building at McEwen Town Center. That's the last thing that I remember being built in that prior year. But, I mean, you can see it's substantially lower. And that's strictly has to do with the development and construction. And, when we get into the quarterly report, we're going to talk a little bit about that. Building permits, all of the tap fees, access fees, impact fees, road impact fees, et cetera, are very much reliant on the ups and downs of that industry. The good news is, when we get into the quarterly report, we actually have some good news.
That is, I say, we're waiting on that.
Let's get to it. I can't wait.
Okay, I'm sorry, also on this page though, down at the bottom under expenditures, property and liability costs, it was like, what is that? I mean, it's like $4 million or something, and the budgeted amount was $109,000, and it turned out to be $4 million.
Yeah.
So what is that?
Or what the difference is, this is where depreciation goes. So with all the assets the water sewer fund owns, that's the yearly depreciation that goes into this line item.
Yeah, I guess this is the time, Mike, when we ought to remind you that when we do the final report, you have to remember that unlike the general fund and the special revenue funds, this is an enterprise fund, and it has to be reported in the audit as a corporation would. So, we have to apply slightly different techniques than.
Okay. I'm ready to go to the good news.
You want the good news? Mike gave you the bad news, so I think he ought to give you the good news, too.
Sure.
One thing while he's talking, though, I'll pass out, is this came out in the, I think, the Chamber of Commerce thing today. It's got the building permits, and it reflects, I have a couple of other copies if y'all want it, but on residential, last year, through September, we did 2.7 million this year. In the city of Franklin, 10.4 million. And on non-residential, last year we had 13 we had one permit for 147,000. This year we had 4 permits for 37 million. So that's
Might
have to be
it was one really
big hotel.
big hotel.
Yeah.
We'll take all that we can.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
But
exactly.
that does come out every month in the chamber. And it is interesting to follow. We follow this back almost 10 years, so
What was the total non-residential
valuation
amount last year?
last year was 2.7 million. No, this is just the month of September.
I know, but just for the whole year, do you know what that number was?
I've got it, but I don't have, not off the top of my head.
Because I swear, we probably didn't have $37 million worth.
It was very low. It was.
The last year? Yeah. It was.
You really gotta be
If
right.
there's one month
Thank
that
the Lord
did
for
all of
Drury.
last year.
And, you had, the year before that, you had a bad economy, but last year you had a bad economy and no one loaning any money. So you had probably the worst of all situations. I don't think that you got because this was not ready when we sent out the packet, the summary for the quarterly report. This is the page that normally goes to the top.
Oh, okay.
So there's nothing to read, but that you can keep that with it.
No, I don't have one of those. Who gets one of those? He's got one. Thank you, Ken.
Okay, well, where do we want to start with this?
Good news.
Yeah, I believe I know what number Russ is alluding to. If we look at local sales tax, the year-to-date number so far for this year over last year is 8.6% higher, because the number that we have is 5.4 million compared to 5 million last year. And not only is it that number that's higher, if you go down the fourth column, you'll see some others where if you'll notice that it says more than 100%, that indicates to you that the current year for those numbers are also higher than the previous year. And that's where even what Russ was talking about, even, say, building permits are higher this year.
And how much of that has to do with the flooding, I wondered? You know.
Must be a lot of them are liquor taxes.
Well, I'm talking about the building permits. I
We
just
gave the
wanted to-
residential ones away for free for several months, so.
Good.
Yeah, so I don't think there's
So
a
maybe-
lot there. We tracked the value of what was given. I'd have to get back to you on
Yeah.
that number, but I know we tracked
be
that
interesting.
as we're going along, because
Well, I
We're
just saw one in the newspaper somewhere where it
Mm-hmm.
named an amount, so I assumed that one probably was not given away free.
well, and even now, though, if people come in
Oh,
and
really?
tell
Are
us,
you asking?
we'll grant an exception.
Okay.
You know, we've said,
Very good.
case by case, we'll work with people on that
Very
issue,
good.
so.
Very good. Well, I'm glad to hear that then. Makes it sound better.
Well, definitely.
Does it sound better?
Nice.
Very
Nice.
impressive. There.
You're in trouble, Russ.
What's this, yeah, we're stepping it up.
Very, very readable. Thank you.
Glad to hear
Thank you
mine.
that it's not like minute, and I'm not.
Well, the story is when we have good news, we like to present it.
Sometimes you just get these little things that you can't even read, I need a piece of paper.
Okay, so now, are you going to look at this? Is that
Okay, what am I on?
this?
Russ,
I mean,
would you like to go
Well,
back?
this is kind of supporting data, if you will. What we've done is taken the three largest revenues out of the general fund, and they start on, I guess on page 4, with the property tax, and tried to give you some perspective over the last 4 or 5 years in varying cases. On most of these graphs, the top left is going to give you a historical perspective for the last few years. Immediately to the right, it's going to show you where we are this year compared to our budget. And let you know that we're tracking right on top of the budget in the case of the property tax this year.
I'm sorry, what's RESID?
Residential.
Residential.
Hello, I didn't know that. I thought
And we've tried to show you the change from month to month of how it fluctuates in a lot of cases, because, when you take the reports that we give you, the standard reports, and it says, through September, we've done $3 million, and the budget is $10 million, you really don't know where we are.
Right.
So what we're trying to do is to take that seasonality now and to build it into all of our reports. So, Mike, if you want to take it from there, they can kind of flip through these charts as you talk about it. But it gives you property tax, sales tax, and our favorite building permits. You'll love the curve on that page.
Well, let me ask you on the sales tax here, does it always show that it's moving up from August through?
This is cumulative.
Well, gotcha.
They're growing.
Thank you. I understand what you're saying now.
If you go to building permits, it's a little more reflective, because what you're going to see
Yes, that's, we were just talking about.
is, we pared down our budget to a great extent to reflect a pretty morbid outlook on what we would have. And just through the first 3 months, we've had a pretty substantial increase over that.
Is this 3?
This
Oh, yeah,
is
of course, okay.
building.
July to September.
And again,
Yeah, but
maybe while we have you completely distracted, you may want to go over a couple of pages to facilities tax and road impact fees. Because that's been our biggest concern, are the deficits in those accounts. And we have no concern about being able to overcome those deficits. The question is, how long will it take? And we've obviously made a pretty good start in the first 3 months of this fiscal year to try to catch up some ground on that. Still have a long way to go. I mean, we don't need another turn in the economy that would prevent us from keeping up that pace. But if we can just go at what would be closer to a normal pace the rest of the year, we can go a long way towards curing the deficit in the facilities tax, and we'll probably have enough to make up that much smaller deficit in the road impact fee.
But now remember, though, the road impact fee is paying out a lot more in debt service, though, than it did those previous years.
That is true.
So in other words, that would have to like double from what we had last year to just keep up.
I don't remember the exact number on that, but it's clearly going up. But again, I think
Going out.
when you're talking about being 34% of the prior year or down 66%.
Exactly.
It's not going to take a whole lot of improvement to.
To be
And
much
you're against a weak number.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, well, you're right about that, against the
Morally
world
correct.
number.
But again, you'll be surprised, I think, at the hotel tax throughout all of this. The hotel tax has
It
been
looked good, didn't it?
as steady as the property tax, really, and the gas tax numbers. So
See, more people are coming in.
what we would really like is to get some feedback from you. If you like this type of report, if you like these charts, if there's something else that you would like instead of the charts that we've selected to do, there may be something more informative. We elected not to put numbers in here because you've got numbers in here. And our goal is to add a column next to current year-to-date actuals and prior year-to-date where it says against the budget, seasonally divided.
That would be good.
So-
I do like that very
In other
much.
words, we would break down the property tax and say, basically, we're going to collect 0 in July, 0 in August, 0 in September. So if the number is 0, you know we're okay. But sales tax wouldn't be that way. It would be, 5% in September of the annual amount, et cetera.
Right. I do think that would be a good improvement. Thank you for thinking.
I like these charts.
And I
They're
do,
clear.
I agree, I think the charts are very good. However, I think we also need to have just the flat numbers though, because as we were just stating, better than the year before is not necessarily great, but the combination of these, I think, is very good. What, does everybody else think? Combination of looking at it on the chart
And the, oh,
and
yeah.
having the numbers, I think that's very
Yeah,
good.
plus this gives you the story right here. You can look at it and know exactly what's happening.
And that way, then you can drill down in this.
Yeah.
Make you the-
That's
I like
right.
this
I like
because you
that.
need a picture to,
Maybe one item of note
Okay.
on the general fund for the quarterly report, July to September. Because it's the first quarter, it's before property tax collections begin. So that's why you will see a deficit, but hopefully as those property tax collections start coming in, that deficit will go down. So I just knew that this, because it is a first quarter, it's almost always going to be a deficit. It's just that once property tax starts coming in, that hopefully will change very quickly.
And now these are not numbered.
The notices didn't go out till after
Oh, the pages on it, that's right.
after this.
Exactly.
This period
So what will
ended.
happen is when we do the October through December quarterly report, you actually will have property tax included in it.
We were looking in the general fund for the first quarter, and again, we were saying these are not consecutively numbered where the others were, but as you look under road impact fees, talking about, the money there, prior year to date, we had 50,000, current year to date, we have 549,000. That's the kind of thing that can really make a big difference in, not only in those funds, but just in general, and also is a good sign. And the road impact fees really had nothing to do probably with the flood at all.
No.
Because that would be new.
That's
new
driven
to-
by development.
So, that, as I say, that was, I don't remember anything else that I really looked. Hotel motel, though, was also up, as we were stating.
Yeah.
And I don't remember looking at facilities.
tourist.
And they reflect Opryland being closed, too.
Yeah, that's a possibility. I hadn't thought about
Well,
that.
that's a
Got
big
lot of
one.
utility.
That's a big one. Because they've been booked down here.
Where is facilities tax? Maybe I just missed it. I can't find it right now.
Typically, a
Typically
little over
right now.
halfway through.
Oh, I see it. I just didn't. Well, even that one is much better, too. Looking prior year to date was 107,000, and now it's 557,000. So both of those are showing
Very much so.
good improvement.
And they seem to actually be picking up steam if you look at the month-by-month numbers. I mean, they're
You're
actually,
right.
August was double July, and September was double August. So, again, I thought you'd want to hear the good news. This is the type of thing that we'd like to get, again, some feedback from you. If there's anything that if there are any numbers that are missing that would help you better understand all the numbers on the page, because they do kind of run together after a while.
Right.
And they're hard to understand, and using this page, we can give you a little bit of narrative about
that's
our
good.
opinion about these. But I think it also helps you focus on the main revenue sources, because some of the smaller ones are, can go up and down on a whim, so to speak, and these are the big ones that we have to focus on.
And your management comments are great. That really helps. So I like this a lot.
And as you say...
Steve, they like your comments.
Yeah, they're good.
And as we say, there's so many of them that are the big money makers that they really have so much more impact on us overall.
No question.
Yes. Okay. As I say, certainly good to see positive or things that look like very positive
Yeah,
for
because the
us.
building permits says the number of permits are up 41%. Good.
Do we have any other
There we go.
specific comments about the quarterly report? And again, we are saying, yes, we'd like this, but what about some others?
I believe Ray noted the things that I had noticed, but I mean, I knew it just seemed like it was positive numbers we were seeing, and that actually was a very positive outlook.
I had a question for you. Are the other aldermen going to get a copy of this?
I don't know, we might close them for
Yeah.
that, since they're not on the committee. so.
You guys aren't, with those marathon budget meetings, maybe we'll hold out on, but we'll share that with everyone.
Black and white.
Yeah, we'll do black and white. I'll send it out in the weekly update.
This would be very
I'll send
helpful,
that out
make
to
sure they
them.
get that.
And again, we really sincerely would like to have
Sure, you give it
feedback,
to 'em, but
because
they need to have it.
we'd like to know what you'd like to see, and we would ultimately post this then on the website, where it would be readily accessible.
Like this kind of thing?
Yeah, but we want to get it perfected a little farther
Yeah,
first.
that would be very helpful, I think, for the public.
And your comment about that extra column here, let's try that. It seems really good to me.
Seasonal, yeah.
Seasonal,
I like that
seems
idea,
very
too.
good.
How much smaller does it make the print?
Well, now, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Thank you for
I
that
don't think the font
comment.
size can go any smaller.
Yeah, I mean,
That's a good-
so bad.
I would offer just one observation on general fund, just looking at it. Our expenditures in the general fund are tracking a little bit ahead of where they were this time last year. And it's almost entirely in the non-personnel area, and in particular, the transfer to other funds. When you look at personnel, we're actually spending a good bit less than we did a year ago in that area. So we're keeping an eye on that, we're keeping a close eye on that, but I think that may be a timing issue on some things, and I don't know if you have specifics you want to comment on that, but the big driver of our expenditures overall, the big picture in the general fund, 2/3 of it's in the personnel area, and in that area, we're tracking a little better than we were a year ago. In the non-personnel areas, that's been higher and a higher percentage earlier in the year this time around, so I don't know if there's some
Two
things to hit on that
The
specifically.
flood delayed some work that had to be put into the first quarter of fiscal 11, and you're going to see that in the amendments.
Your budget amendments will reflect that.
And we've had to spend the money, so the expense is already in there in the O&M section, and that's why it's really elevated. It was the cost of the flood, and it was the cost of the work that, because of the flood, we didn't get done, and pushed from the fourth quarter of last year into the first quarter of
carried
this
it
year.
over.
That's
Yeah.
right.
So that hits our budget, and that causes that non-personnel number to grow a little bit, more than what we had a year ago when we weren't dealing with that kind
So
of
when
cost
we
shift.
see that, that'll be
You'll-
separated out.
The next item we talk about has that list of budget amendments. You'll see some of the direct evidence of that when we go through those budget amendments. The other thing to talk about on the revenue side that isn't reflected in this is we're going to start receiving the FEMA payments. As you remember, we put in about $600,000 worth of reimbursement. I got a letter yesterday that our first chunk of payments of about $185,000 is been approved, and I asked how quickly we normally get that, and the answer was within a few days. So we should see that $185,000, which is our first set of the reimbursement worksheets that we did come in. So that will be a revenue that sort of starts, that we'll see materialize through the remainder of the fiscal year, that should offset at least some of these expenses that we either experienced in the last fiscal year or have pushed other expenses into this fiscal year.
Well, when those payments come in, where do they go? Where are they reflected?
You'll see them in the general fund.
And they'll just be listed as reimbursements?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because we
We
did,
can, yeah, and we can code those so you see it as FEMA, and so we know that.
right.
We'll see, we'll be able to track that element.
because there definitely were those expenditures that we would not normally have had.
Absolutely.
So that's really wonderful, though, that we're getting reimbursement for a lot of it.
Yes.
I want to go back to one thing that was said whenever you were talking about personnel. You know, that is something that is completely stable. And so if you're seeing that that's a little bit lower, then I think that probably that's one of those things that may stay.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to say that they're not going to change, but what I'm saying is, as opposed to so many things that are seasonal, that is going to be paid every month, no matter, that expenditure is going to be made no matter what, no matter whether there's a flood or not, even,
Right.
you know.
And I look at that in two contexts. I look at it compared to last year, where we're spending about 86% of what we had spent in the prior year, same period. And I also look at it generally as just 25% into the year, we've spent about 21% in our personnel budget. So
Yes.
And we also.
that's what that makes me feel a little better than that gross number.
Yeah.
January
The pay raise.
Yeah,
Right, so see, that's going to work out then.
Yeah, that
No.
will be part of that too.
So what's the employee benefits, though, current year-to-date actual versus prior year-to-date actual seems to be down?
That's the $2 million that we put in the pension fund
Is that-
last year.
Oh, so that's not
It was
reflected.
non-recurring.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Yeah, collectively, when you look at that.
So that's where
that-
it shows it coming out of, okay.
Okay.
Our,
It's not.
and our quarterly contribution is $1.3 million.
I think so.
Any other comments that we want to make about?
No, the only thing I'd say is, again, through 3 months, it's really hard to put a whole lot of stock in it because you have 2 typically slow months in there. But on the revenue side, you know, the takeaway is things are improving. They're not great, but they're certainly improving. And it's pretty much across the board. I mean, it's now beginning to include some construction projects, which we have not seen in 18 months or so.
Why is there such a difference in that notices, subscriptions, and publicity?
Publications.
General
So
fund?
on page, well, yeah, no, page 2, general fund. There's current, actual date, and prior.
It varies by department. There are different things that go in there. A lot of it is, you know, whenever we're advertising for bids, all of that expense goes in there.
Seems like.
We have to look at the specifics. It's a relatively small budget overall.
And it's subject to timing.
There's some
Yeah.
timing, yeah, it's about $350,000 total for the whole budget, if
Yeah.
I'm reading that right.
For all
So,
departments.
yeah, for everything. So it's probably some timing issues. We'd have to look at that specifically.
The one thing that we haven't said anything about, though, is that transit has gotten 62% of its budgeted amount already in 1 quarter. I had not caught that until you handed out this page right here.
If you've ever done a school budget, by the time you get to September, you've spent, 95% of your budget for the year, because it takes that long before the state money typically comes in. You know, none of the federal or state support for the transit comes in at the beginning of
So
the
that's sort of
Okay.
part of their
Okay.
cycle.
It is part of their
Spend
cycle.
ours first.
That's why you had lines of credit if you ran a school system.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We just borrowed from our general fund.
Well, we didn't have a reserve fund, so there you go.
We are the bank.
That's a perfect example of really, number one, why we give you quarterly reports instead of just monthly reports. We can give you all the monthly reports that you would like, more than you could ever shred. And we'll be happy to do that. If you have specific questions, we'll be happy to produce what you need. But again, looking at it on a quarterly basis appears to be about right.
I agree.
In terms of kind of taking the pulse of how the finances are going during the year.
Well, and the other one I wanted to ask about was that, it seems to me it's a bit high here too, is that property and liabilities cost, page 2.
Well, if that includes the insurance,
What's going on there?
That was one of the little notes that I had, and I didn't get the slide prepared for that. But our insurance, with a few exceptions, has gone up pretty substantially
Yeah, it
this
looks
year.
like it.
And
In what
Some of
areas?
that-
All across the board, or?
well, a lot of it is errors and omissions, and I think you're familiar with the
Yeah.
reasons for that.
Yeah.
But it also, as we add to our property every year,
Yeah.
the value of that continues to go up. So I noticed in every department, I think the property and liability insurance is more, at least 10% more than it was last year.
I'll be providing you probably end of the week, though, an update on our workers' comp. If you remember on that, we moved to self-insured. That first quarter has been very positive in terms of if you prorate the premium we would have paid and then what we paid out of pocket with deductibles a year ago, it's somewhere around $130,000, and we've spent maybe $30,000 in the self-insured. So,
And we budgeted for worst case.
yeah, and we
which is
budgeted
good.
much more than that. So that's doing what we had hoped it would do. We need to continue to monitor it and stay on top of it, but that on the insurance side is showing a good trend.
Very good. And let's see, the budget amendments in our next.
The last thing I have for you tonight is the budget amendments. And with us giving you a quarterly report, we were thinking it might be best to try and do quarterly amendments. And a lot of what these amendments are what we've already discussed about how they were ordered in the previous year, but not received until the current year. And so, according to accounting rules, they have to be expensed in the current year rather than the prior year. So, of these budget amendments, probably the most substantial are first, there are 14 police cars. You'll notice in the Parks Department, there's some fencing that basically was installed in the current year instead of being installed in the prior year. And the
It
other
has something to do with flooding.
Flooding,
That's right.
Exactly. That's it.
Absolutely.
And one thing that we added also is, as we were looking at the utilities in the police department, we noticed that after knowing how much it seems like it's coming in on a monthly basis, that they may not have as much budgeted in utilities as they may have needed. So that's how come there's 81,000. And so in essence, those are the three highest amounts in these amendments. But what would happen is, if they are approved in totality, what would happen is, whereas we had a draw from fund balance in 2011 previously of like $670,000, this essentially would add to that and make a budgeted draw of $1.3 million. So in essence, that's the impact it would have on the general fund.
1.3 million draw?
Yes.
So it's up about 600,000. I will point out that they not only were ordered, these items were not only ordered in the prior year, they were budgeted in the prior year.
Exactly.
And it's simply because of the timing of their arrival and the payment that these need to be brought forward. And because we didn't spend the money in the prior year, the money is really, that we would have spent is sitting in the fund balance. So it's just, again, it's an issue
If
of timing.
it's a draw from last year's fund balance or a draw from this year's fund balance.
That's right, it's still the same.
Well, all I know is I'm glad to see those police cars. For the rest of them just drop apart. They were so bad.
Any specific?
That's a good thing.
Without objection, we will put this in ordinance form and take it to your
Yep.
next meeting.
That's
Do
good.
we need a motion on that to carry it forward?
I move that we adopt this quarterly amendment to last year.
Second.
This year's budget.
This year's budget.
This year's budget.
Okay. Any other? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no.
In addition to what Mike talked about bringing these generally to you on a quarterly basis, along with the report, which I think is a great improvement for us. One of the other things we talked about a couple months ago is some administrative authority to make some amendments within the total appropriation. And that's going to be on the board's agenda this coming week on Tuesday. And if you remember, that also had a quarterly reporting component to it as well. So we'll kind of sync all those up so that quarterly we're looking at where we are on the budget, what adjustments we've made. And again, that administrative authority, the board's still got to approve that, but that is within the total appropriation, so we're not changing the appropriation with what you've given administrative authority on. And it's no more than $25,000 in terms of what might shift between departments. And again, we report that to you on a quarterly basis. So we'll go over that on Tuesday, but it all kind of syncs up with a quarterly look at where we are.
And let's see, we said that the discussion of the auto policy would be deferred.
For that, yes.
For a different time. Okay, and then the last item would just be the monthly reports, but that's for information only.
And you got a lot of that already.
Right, exactly. You know, we really did
Yes.
get a lot of this.
I will add that we did get the October report from the conference center, and it was a positive report.
Oh, good.
To the
Is that in
tune of
here?
about, it is not, we just got
Just
it.
got
Okay,
But
what is
there was
that?
one
Tell me
in
about
here,
that, because
though.
I'm interested in that.
Well, there was a profit for the month was $106,000, and that's split 50/50 with the county.
Okay, so.
And you'll get that
what month?
report.
We'll get it next
Yeah.
time.
That's the month of October. In your packet was the month of September. And
What was that?
and year-to-date, they're $100,000 to the plus last year.
Wait a minute, year-to-date.
Look on the back.
The last page of this packet is the September
Okay.
report.
So, go ahead, I'm sorry, what year-to-date is what?
Year-to-date through October, which you don't have, is 100,000 almost even. The same time last year, we were 45,000 to the negative.
To the negative?
To the negative.
Yeah. Oh, that's right, I remember we had to pay.
After 4 months, so that's a good turnaround. And you do have a copy of, in that informational, you've got the conference center draft audit. Again, when we get you our regular audit, we'll also have the bound copies of the conference center audit. We don't have them yet.
Is that the reason this is a draft, that there was a statement that toward the end, economic outlook for next month's bottom of 6 remains volatile and uncertain. We're projecting further decline in revenues of approximately, and they left that blank.
That's last year's MD&A. It hasn't been updated. But the numbers are correct for
Okay,
the year ending June 30.
okay.
Yeah. I didn't see this. I think
Okay. All right, then our last item would be to establish a date for December meeting. And because, again, the third Thursday conflicts with the Planning Commission, did we find out whether the Planning Commission is going to have a 5 o'clock meeting?
I've been promised that there'll be no work session at the 5 o'clock hour. So we can keep our normal time and date if that can work for you on that Thursday.
Okay, if that does, and we would think it would be about like this meeting, maybe an
I
hour,
would expect-
because we're not planning to have the auditors.
We'll give you the audit, but we won't have the
Right.
auditors.
Good.
Because we
Okay.
need to
That's
have
January?
we need to accept the audit by the end of
Yeah, we could
by
actually
December,
make that.
through December. So we,
I don't even see why.
Do bear in mind, Russ has about an hour and a half PowerPoint on auto allowance that he
That's
wants to
right.
show everybody. But
No one can leave.
I'm joking.
I'm bringing dinner.
So we're saying on Thursday the 16th?
So we would stick with the 16th at 5 o'clock?
okay, that's
You said
good
the
to find
16th?
out.
Yes, that's the
What I heard you say.
That sounds good. Okay, so we're just set at our regular time.
Be the
then.
normal time.
Thank you for checking on that, because that does make a difference. Well, I think then, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Good. It's also good to have some good